Well, thank you very much to Keith and the team at Cycling Scotland for inviting me along to join you here this morning. I suspect earlier this year we wouldn't have been anticipating having to have the national conference for Cycling Scotland to be taking place in a virtual space, although it's become the normality for many of us in recent months, and I suspect will be the case for a number of months yet. But one of the things that I've been struck by has been the way in which we've all had to rise to the challenge and to adapt our ways in order to meet the difficulties and the restrictions which we've faced over recent months. And I'm very grateful to those who within the active travel sector have played their part in supporting us in doing so. I want to take this opportunity to reflect a bit on the key role that active travel now plays within the strategies and the plans that we are taking forward in transport and across government. But I also want to take the opportunity to discuss with you how we can build on the opportunities that we have created as we move through the pandemic, and also the renewed focus that we've also seen during the course of recent months on cleaner, greener, and making sure that we become a more active nation. Looking back on March, when the extent of the public health emergency was only starting to become clear, all sectors had to act quickly in order to help to address the challenges which we're facing. And that was the case within the active travel sector. People in lockdown, we found, were more active in walking, wheeling, and cycling in unprecedented numbers, which was fantastic to see. And given the need to physically distance and to keep people safe from traffic, we also had to put in place temporary safety measures in order to address these issues. As a result of that, we worked closely with our partners, and we devised the Spaces for People programme, which provided 100% funding and a package of support for all of our 32 local authorities. In doing that, we repurposed what was £39 million of funding to support temporary and also temporary road reallocations, and also to provide pop-up schemes in local areas. And I want to thank everyone who's been involved in bringing these schemes forward in what has been a very challenging timescale. I also want to recognise that this has been to some extent, in some areas, a fairly wide-scale change, and it's had to be taken forward at a significant pace. And I recognise that in doing that, it can create some anxiety and a level of criticism. I also understand that it is vitally important that when we implement changes quickly, that people who are affected by them and the changes that come about as a result, that we continue to listen to their concerns on these matters. The key objective of Spaces for People is to help to keep people safe during the COVID-19 emergency. So some of these schemes will, of course, only be there for an appropriate period of time, while there is still the need for individuals to physically distance. However, where there is an appetite locally to lock in these changes on a permanent basis, we will, as a government, look to support these local authorities to gather the evidence of what's working well, and to support them in applying for funding from our programmes which can help to deliver permanent active travel infrastructure. Now, those who may take forward this option will obviously have to go through the normal process to ensure that the appropriate consultation is taking place, but I do hope that we can see a permanent, lasting legacy of active travel infrastructure coming about as a result of the Spaces for People initiative that was taken forward. I want to turn to a more strategic context now, and in particular, at the beginning of this year, we had a focus on the introduction and implementation of our national transport strategy, which is aimed at delivering a modern, accessible transport system that will protect our climate and also help to improve lives over the course of the next 20 years. Despite the disruption, this remains very relevant to our circumstances today. The strategy is clear that future transport investment decisions will be prioritised with walking, wheeling, cycling, public transport and shared transport options being the priority and the hierarchy which will inform our investment decisions going forward. We're now on course to publish the first annual delivery plan for our national strategy, which should be published by the end of this year. Alongside the NTS, we are also taking forward work on our second strategic transport projects review, which will deliver our 20-year vision for transport interventions. We began this process in early 2019, and obviously during the course of the pandemic, some of that work has been disrupted. We therefore intend to take the final report from the STPR process forward in two phases, with the initial phase 1, being completed by the end of this year and the report published in the spring of next year, and with phase 2 being completed by the end of 2021. In September, with the publication of the programme for government, we also committed to investing over £500 million in active travel over the course of the next 5 years. This was a decision which was made in response to a direct recommendation from the Cycling Action Plan for Scotland and the Active Travel Task Force Delivery Plan, which set out the need for long-term funding to be put in place in order to deliver on multi-year projects. The programme for government also highlighted that we will continue to take forward our commitment to invest over £500 million for bus priority measures to help to tackle the negative impacts of congestion on bus services. And I highlight these two long-term funding commitments together because they are both aimed at encouraging a transition away from single occupancy car use to a more sustainable form of travel. I'd also like to see local authorities make use of this investment to bring forward what I believe could be large-scale, ambitious and joined-up public transport projects with an aim to help to support our green recovery. These projects will help to integrate public transport with walking and cycling and truly transform the way in which our towns and cities are shaped, helping to support us in achieving our climate change target while also helping to improve the health and well-being of our nation. As well as the strategic context I've just set out, there are many more enablers for active travel across the Scottish Government and its policy work. These include the development of the National Planning Framework for and potentially for an expansion of permitted development rights to support easier cycling storage options. We're also learning from the work which has been taking place over the last 8 months and responding to some of the concerns that partners have raised with us since we started to invest in larger scale active travel infrastructure. For example, we've already made some changes, including reducing match funding requirements for local authorities and others who are providing active travel infrastructure through the Places for Everyone programme. That match funding has been reduced from 50% to 30% for the contribution that has to now be made by local authorities. We've also restarted work which was necessary to be paused during the course of the pandemic. This includes areas such as the review of traffic regulation orders and the process that surrounds them, and also work on the cycling by design guidance, which is now due to be published next year. And we're also now restarting our consideration of the next cycling plan. We have also invested unprecedented amounts of money in active travel infrastructure, but that alone will not increase people cycling in itself. And we need to consider how we can inform, support and encourage more people to cycle, and how we can open up access to cycling and riding for all. So it's not just about increasing the numbers of cycling overall, it's also about increasing the range of people who are taking up cycling. Given the focus today at your conference, I also want to take this opportunity to draw your attention to the consultation on our forthcoming road safety framework. I meet on a quarterly basis with the Active Travel Commissioner Lee Craigie. Our discussions have included the issue of safety of our roads, particularly for cyclists, and the public perceptions around this. I'm therefore very keen to make sure that we highlight the strengths and also the crucial links between this road safety framework and any future cycling plan. And with this in mind, I want to remind you that you have the opportunity to engage in this consultation process, which is due to be complete by the 1st of December this year. So if you have a view on the content of the road safety framework, please take this opportunity to feed in your views to the consultation exercise. As I previously highlighted, the numbers of people walking and cycling rose greatly during the course of the lockdown. We are continuing to monitor traffic volumes, and it's also very clear that whilst attitudes to walking and cycling remain positive, single occupancy vehicle trips are growing again. Now more than ever, it's vital that we take the necessary steps to maintain and to increase the momentum around active travel and locking in the benefits of walking, wheeling and cycling, which have been built up over recent months. I've got no doubt that there will be focal points over the course of the next couple of years that can help to support us in realising this ambition, including what will be a very exciting event with the UCI World Cycling on 2023, and I'm keen to make sure that we capitalise on that major event taking place and encouraging cycling across Scotland. So, in drawing my remarks to a close, can I again thank everyone for their input over recent months and their ongoing work within the active travel sector, and in particular to the work that's been taken forward in helping to support people in getting active with cycling over recent months. And I look forward to working with you as we go forward to try to make sure that we embed that as a long-term benefit that we get from the period of the pandemic. But I'm more than happy to respond to any questions that those who are joining us this morning may have for me. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Matheson, Cabinet Secretary, for taking time. I understand you have a moment or two and are able to take some Q&A. The first of these we've had in advance, and I understand it's been shared with your officials. But the Mobility and Access Committee Scotland have asked, with the increase in cycling for commuting and leisure, shared paths are becoming busier, with many people reporting an inability to physically distance from cyclists on these paths, or near misses as some cyclists pass too close and fast. Will there be an opportunity with upgrades and new infrastructure to introduce more segregated paths?
So I think that's a really good point that's been raised by the committee, because it's an issue which has been raised with me directly by constituents who've experienced ever increasing demand on some of the pathways, particularly my own constituency on the canal pathways, where there has been a significant increase in the number of people who are walking and cycling. So I think there's a couple of issues there. One is that I think it highlights the need for us to have a greater level of segregated space for cycling and walking, and part of our ongoing investment in this area of infrastructure provides us an opportunity to continue to do that. There is, if I just take a practical example, I know that Scottish Canals are looking at several areas of the canal network to consider whether they could expand the pathways in order to provide more space, which was an issue I discussed with the Chair and the Chief Executive, and it's something which they're very actively looking at the present moment. And I believe they've identified a few areas where they believe that that could be taken forward in the very near future. There is another element to it as well, and that is that given that we will, for some time, always have to share pathways with walkers and cyclers and people who are wheeling, there is a need for us all to be mindful of our behaviour. So I have found myself on occasions where I have witnessed what I would view as being unacceptable behaviour, and how people are making use of some of these shared walkways. So I think there's a need for us to remind people of some of the etiquette that's necessary when you are sharing this space to try and accommodate everyone's needs. And it may be that we think about how we can help to articulate that message and get that message across to everyone who's making use of these shared spaces in a way that helps to inform them about what they should do and what they should, the do's and don'ts of what you should do. So I'm keen to not just think about how we can put in more infrastructure, but also how we can also amend people's behaviour and encourage good practice, whether you're walking, cycling, or wheeling on the shared road space that we have at the present time.
It's good old-fashioned consideration, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Jessica Gillespie is asking, with another potential lockdown on the cards, will there be any change in how we try and promote active travel, learning from experiences from the first lockdown? So
the approach for any potential lockdown now in Scotland is based upon the 5-level system, which was introduced this week. That's a system which will be used for determining whether there are any more localised lockdowns, for example, to level 4. Therefore, the intention at this stage is to use a level system to reflect where restrictions are necessary rather than it being applied on a nationwide basis. That's not to say that at some point we may have to have a national lockdown. It's not something that's being considered at the present moment, but who knows with this virus whether it may be necessary at some point in the future. Other lessons that can be learned, I think we're in a better place now than we were in March, because we have things like the Spaces for People programmes in some areas in place, in some local authorities still being rolled out. So there's an opportunity for them to continue to push that forward. And I would hope that we now have a nation that has a greater level of bike ownership as a result of the lockdown earlier this year, given the sales that we have witnessed in bikes and the demand for bikes over the course of the spring and the summer, that there are more people now prepared to take active travel as the means by which they will get around during any more restrictive lockdowns. So I think we start from a better place than where we were in March, with the infrastructure that's now been put in place, and also by people who have taken up walking, wheeling, or cycling during the last lockdown, that they know what their options are and how they can go about doing that, and are better prepared for doing it should they choose to do that again at some future point. Okay, I've got a couple more if you have time, CabSec. So Stella Thompson is asking, actually, it's very, very pertinent to what we've just been talking about. Given the pushback against several Spaces for People projects across the country, and against a backdrop of continuing deaths and injuries for cyclists from collisions with vehicles, what changes at government level are needed to speed up the processes for permanent infrastructure without constant delay from a vocal minority? Well, look, I'm very conscious, Stella raises a very good issue, and I'm very conscious that some of our colleagues in local authorities have taken forward fairly ambitious programmes within the Spaces for People initiative that have obviously, in some cases, received significant pushback in some communities. And I know from engagements I've had with some of the local authorities involved in this process that they continue to engage and to work with these communities to help to share their understanding of what they're trying to achieve. I think, Stella, there are two things that I think have been demonstrated more clearly than ever during the course of the last couple of months, is that a greater expansion of dedicated active travel space is important, particularly the provision of things like dedicated cycle routes are more important in helping to support people in choosing to cycle. I know from myself and from my children that using the dedicated cycle routes make a massive difference and have made a really positive contribution to supporting people in cycling. So dedicated space. The other element that I think is much more obvious now, and to some on this call, I've got no doubt is obvious to them for some time, is that we need to see the levels of cars in some of our city centres reduce. It's not just about getting to the point of providing dedicated cycle space. It's also about seeing a reduction in the volume of cars that we have, particularly in our cities and town centres, and how we can go about promoting that and supporting that. And that's a key area that we are giving a significant level of consideration as we look to move forward with our climate change update plan, which will be issued later this year or into early next year, where we will set out more details and some of the measures that we will have to take in order to address behaviour which is associated with car use. So more active travel infrastructure and also about reducing the level of cars on our road are the two key issues I think that we can take from our experience over recent months.
Thank you. And a last quick question, if I may. Richard Davison asks a terrific question. Cycling is a great measure, as we all know, to increase active transport. But despite being an economical mode of transport, many schemes do not specifically target those in lower socioeconomic groups who could benefit greatly. There's a lack of research which investigates effective cycling interventions with this group of people. Do you have any ideas, suggestions of what the government could or should do to address this? Because as we know, it's very much part of your strategy around our economy as well.
So I think Richard raises a really good issue, and it was an issue that when I came into this role, I was very keen to address with active travel colleagues, and those who are on the active travel task force will be aware of my view about the need to make sure that as we see an expansion of provision around active travel and encouraging people to cycle, it doesn't become something which is only available to those who can afford to do so and have access to the necessary facilities. So there's a range of things that we've been taking forward, for example, around some aspects of the national planning framework, and also our engagement with partners in, for example, social housing provision and how we can support them in providing access to cycling facilities and also to bikes itself, including e-bikes that they could have in order to allow individuals to make use of them. I think it wasn't this summer, it was the summer before, visited one of the housing associations in Greenock, where we provided funding for them to have a pool of e-bikes that could be booked by their tenants to make use for getting around, which otherwise they would be unable to afford to do because of the costs associated with e-bikes. So I think it's about trying to think about how we go about doing these things in a different way. Who are the partners that we could work with that could help to facilitate access to cycling infrastructure, whether that be somewhere to store your bikes, to be able to actually get access to a bike. I'm interested in Richard's point around the lack of research in this area, because if there is an opportunity for us to look at how we could address this issue more effectively and to find ways in which to address it more effectively, then we need to make sure that we have a proper understanding of what the issues are. And if there is a need for us to look at whether we should carry out some research in this area, I'm very open to that. So if Richard or others have suggestions or ideas that think that we should be considering and looking at to help our understanding in this area, I'd be more than happy to consider that, because I want to make sure that when we are supporting people to take up active travel, that it's not something which is based upon whether you can afford to do so or not, and also that we are not unintentionally exacerbating the health and social inequalities which we already have in aspects of our society when it comes to active travel investment, and that we are putting the right infrastructure into place to support people who may be in our lower income households to be able to participate in cycling and active travel as well. So embedding it in planning, supporting those who are working within communities that may be working with individuals who are in lower incomes, while at the same time making sure that we are deploying the infrastructure into our towns and cities that ensure that everyone has the opportunity to make use of the active travel investment which we are presently making.
Cabinet Secretary, thank you very much. You've been very generous with your time. There were lots and lots of questions, but I'm afraid that's all we have time for. So
okay.
Thank you again for joining us. We know you've got a very busy schedule, so enjoy the rest of your day. Stay safe.
Thank you very much, and I wish Keith and everyone else at Cycling Scotland well with the rest of their conference today. So thank you very much, and no doubt I'll speak to many of you at some point again in the future. Thank you.